So we continue. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to just address a couple issues about the level of freedom that members of the new group of world servers should have. And then I'd like to go with you and look at the fundamental principles underlying what they do. You know, one of the things to keep in mind as you think about this group is that you might ask, well, what holds them together as a group? What is that energy that holds it together? And according to the Tibetan, what holds the group together is a commonality of an inner structure of thought. It's a collection of thought forms that hold the group together. And in each case, every person that is in the group is somebody that's trying to become obedient to their own soul. But with that comes the realization that comes the complete freedom to serve as one sees fit. One of the things about this philosophy is saying that the new group of world servers, there's nothing imposed upon them in terms of how to serve, where to serve, what to do. None of that. It's strictly that everybody has the complete freedom to move according to that higher impression, that higher impulse that's happening inside them. So there's no authority, there's no hierarchy, although there's the hierarchy itself, but there's no hierarchy within the new group of world servers that's forcing an agenda on anyone. You're free to do as you like. And it's about freedom from ambition, though. It's not about personality ambition. And so the key is to be clear on what are our motives. You know, what are the motives? When we want to do something out there, is it because we're truly wanting to make the world a better place, or is there any kind of motive about self-gratification somehow built into it? The more we can move away from that individual motive to a more of a selfless motive, the more we're in line with the new group. So let's take a look at some of the key principles and talk about them. Now you have a handout that you want to get out on this one. And you see it, I think it's on the front page, the stapled handout. And there's several principles. So I'm going to have a seat here and we're going to talk about these, okay? So the first one in your handout, it says it's the law of right human relations. It's on that front page. That is so central to the work. It's all about right relationship, right relationship. Now here I've defined it as right human relationship. So here we're talking about right relationship between men and women, between culture and culture, between religion and religion, between the individual and the collective, right relationship between different ideologies and attitudes. In other words, actually, the only way we can become one, which is the goal, is if humanity starts thinking about what constitutes right relationship. And remember, if we really hold the view that the platform that we stand on is the essential divinity of all human beings, then right relationship can be ascertained. Then we can really see that we're all one, but we're all diverse at the same time. So it's oneness realized as diversity. Oneness realized through diversity. That's the Aquarian way. That's the Aquarian way. You know, it is said that humanity is approaching the first initiation. Now, I'm not going to do much with that subject today, maybe a little, but some of you I know are going to be up in Dublin over the weekend, and that's the whole story there. That's the main theme. But as we approach this initiation, one of the key features that humanity has to address in order to make that initiation or take that initiation is the question of what is right relationship, because it's what the whole story is about, and it even goes beyond human. Like, what is the right relationship with Mother Nature? We're seeing wrong relationship all over the place. So we've got wrong relationship with Mother Nature. What is the right relationship with material resources? Money. We got tons of evidence of wrong relationship with money. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that the Tibetan says that the theme of right relationship is the underpinning theme for all humanity to focus on. Now, what sign, I'm going to ask you this kind of as an unfair quiz question. Nothing like asking a quiz question when you haven't actually mentioned it yet, but those are my favorite kinds. What sign of the zodiac do you suppose is most associated with the search for right relationship?
Libra.
Libra, exactly. Libra is the sign of relationship, but at a higher level, it's the sign for the search for right relationship. You know, the scales, balance, right relationship, justice. Interestingly, the Tibetan has said several decades ago, he said that the sign of Libra will become increasingly potent as humanity moves into the 21st century. And all of that makes sense because it's in the 21st century that there's the glimmer of possibility that humanity could actually take this first initiation. And the first initiation is all about right relationship, particularly right relationship having to do with the material, physical dimension of life. And so it's the underlying issue that is facing us all. So that's one major principle. The next is the principle of goodwill. The principle of goodwill. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk a little bit about this, but also use, you have another handout that you might want to get out on this, I believe. Let me just double check that. I think you do. That does it's goodwill versus the will to good. Do you have that? Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about both goodwill and the will to good are part of the agenda of the future. When you think of goodwill, you normally think of how we typically, having the desire to bring goodness into the world and doing something to make that happen. And all of that's part of the work of the new group of world servers. But there's even something higher than that, which is called the will to good. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you an image that will first help you see this, and then we'll do a compare and contrast. But in essence, it's the principle is goodwill, but it should be understood that on a very high level, it results in the will to good. So let's take a look. Let me get this out for us to see. Right here. Okay. Now what this is about is, remember that there are three structures in us. Each of us is composed of pure monad. That's the highest self. That's the spark of divinity within you. That's your essential nature. The soul is your higher consciousness, and the personality is your outer instrument, your lower agent. So agent of the divine, agent of the good. So agent of divine will, agent of the good, and agent of lower will. Okay? So this is how we can understand when the Tibetan uses the term goodwill, and then he'll talk about the will to good, this is how you can understand it. When we talk about goodwill, we're talking about goodness, which is the prerogative of the soul. Goodness comes from the soul, the desire to contribute positivity. The soul is the great center of love. Remember, it's like a Christ in you. So from that comes goodness, loving goodness. And then that goodness is expressed through the personality as an agent of will. So it's spiritual goodness delivered with the will of the personality to make it happen. That's goodwill. Okay? That's a way of looking at it. But then eventually consciousness evolves to the place of the will to good, where there's the agent. The monad itself is a huge power structure of divine will. It's a will that goes beyond your own soul. It's a will that is actually, when we say the will of the Father, where is the will of the Father as a part of you? It's your monad. Because your monad is the Father in you. The monad is, in a way, your piece of the Father. Think of the Father as being the ultimate one flame. I mean Father as in God the Father concept. You know, I'm using the Creator, okay? And that's one flame. Your monad is a spark that arises from that one flame. That's who you are. That's your divine self, and it's will. I mean, it's shambhalic will. It's the will of the Father. And it's out of our view. You see, the monad is not in our consciousness yet, because you have to reach into these two here, soul and personality, have to become completely fused before you wake up to the monad. That's called the transfiguration. That's the third initiation. But this is the promise of the future, where a yet higher kind of will be recognized beyond your own soul. And then that becomes the impulse to express goodness. So the will to good plays out between monad and soul, and goodwill plays out between soul and personality. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the, let's go over the handout you have so that we understand it back and forth a little bit. So goodwill is the will of goodness, whereas the will to good is the will toward goodness. Goodwill relates to the soul. Will to good relates to the triad. Okay, this graphic doesn't show the triad, but realize that the monad, on this graphic, the monad has a triple quality to it, and that's called the spiritual triad. So here in this handout, instead of the word monad, I used the word triad. But there's a triple quality to it. Okay? Goodwill emanates from the will to good. So you can see that in the graphic again. Goodwill is ultimately an emanation from the will to good. In other words, let's look at it another way. Even though, I'm going to get up here so maybe you can see this, even though we are unconscious of this stream, it doesn't mean that that stream is not there. It just means we're unconscious of it. But that stream here, that's descending here, the will to good, though unconscious, it does have influence on the soul, and it gives impulse to goodwill. So even though you're not conscious of the will to good, it's there. It's there. Okay? But when you become an initiate and you become conscious of it, then you become much more able to wield it with greater deliberateness. Okay. The day will come. All right. Goodwill participates in the energy of Christ. Will to good participates in the energy of the monad. You can see that. Goodwill driven by sensed unity and love of whole. Will to good driven by purpose and planned activity. Think of these three structures in the highest sense. I'm going to go over here again here. These three structures, monad is divine will, this is love, this is intelligent activity, the great triplicity. That's the Trinity for us. Each of us is a Trinity in many ways. Each of us is a Trinity in many ways. But the vertical Trinity of us is the Trinity between the monad, the soul, and the personality. The monad is first aspect, will and purpose. Soul is second aspect, love and wisdom. Personality is third aspect, intelligent activity. From the highest, the impulse of purpose must be conditioned by love and wisdom and directed toward intelligent activity. You see? Okay. Where am I at here? Okay. Next one. Grows out of selfless love and is the servant of the Christ. This is goodwill. Grows out of recognition of the universality of life and is the servant to the planetary logos. All right. So we're talking, these are magnitudes of realization, okay? In other words, the monad in you has a energetic rapport with Shambhala, the center where the will of the planetary logos is found. The soul in you has an energetic rapport with the hierarchy led by the Christ. The personality has an energetic rapport with humanity. Shambhala, hierarchy, humanity. lines of connection, energetic influences, okay? So, that's just what is meant by this. This is also, I could break this down further. This is life with a big L, manifesting as quality, resulting in appearance. Life, quality, appearance. Many of you have studied the books Esoteric Psychology, Volume 1. The whole teaching on that work, the Tibetan is trying to lay out that fundamental principle that the monad is the place of universality and life. Life. But the soul is the agency of consciousness to carry life, to deliver life, to create awareness for life. And personality is the outer garment that creates intelligent activity in support of life. So it's this triplicity, and in a way the whole journey of evolution is to slowly lift ourselves to places where we realize these higher structures in a conscious sense, because we're unconscious of so much of it, but the day comes. Okay? Next one. Goodwill unifies in support of evolution. Will to good animates and directs evolution. So think of the soul as being also a great center of unitive consciousness. But think of the monad as a center of purposeful, directed impulse. That's what the first aspect is about. The impulse to. The purposeful note, okay? The will to. Goodwill. Initiates and disciples consciously respond to it, average person unconsciously. Initiates consciously respond to it. Disciples, disciple does not register. That's what that should say. You have to become an initiate before this is actually becoming realized as a conscious recognition. Goodwill is much more the world of discipleship, the world of discipleship. Will to good is the world of initiate life. Okay? So I will obviously have to correct that. The next one, the last one. Goodwill. The goodness of the soul as it animates the will of the personality towards service. Will to good, the will of the monad or triad as it gives higher purpose to the soul and its goodness. So you get the flow. All of these are just trying to describe this in different ways, okay? Are there any questions on that? Okay. Well, let's go back to our principles then, all right? So back to our list here. I'm going to move this out of the way here. Okay. So the next one is the law of group endeavor. The law of group endeavor. In other words, what are we saying here? We're saying that there's a law that says that to be really part of this group, you must think in terms of group. Because remember, no one sees the truth, but everybody sees a piece of it. So there's this fundamental realization that it's in the context of group that the answers must emerge and the actions must go forth. And there's synergy to that too, because when a group comes together and comes up with new insights to move something forward, oftentimes the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts. You know the idea of synergy here. People often talk about that when they meditate. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but a lot of people will talk about a synergy when they meditate in a group versus when they're on their own. That somehow meditation in a group, it's a much deeper experience than just on their own. In a way, that's the meditative version of this same thing. But it is also true when it comes to ideations, realized insights. I think you see the emergence of this in the growing tendencies in humanity to use think tanks. Do you have that expression here? Think tanks. It's growing. The think tank is growing around the world. And there are now think tanks that are based upon, some think tanks are based upon a common group of people with a common set of, a common interest to arrive at new insight. But some are actually now crossing fields. So you get a think tank of maybe somebody from the world of politics, somebody's coming in from the business world, somebody's coming in from the arts. You know what I mean? So it's actually going beyond just within a stream and including many streams. And that's fantastic. That's fantastic. But here's the thing. This is all about Aquarius. Aquarius is the sign of the group. And Aquarius is the sign that says that it's through the diversity of human experience that we actually discover our oneness and can be our oneness. So, more than ever in the past, this particular law, the law of group endeavor, is growing in importance. This law actually was far less important, far less relevant a few hundred years ago. So these laws have growing application according to the seasons of evolution. It's just like, just to highlight it in another sense, I said earlier that we are told that the soul itself has 7 laws that govern the soul, but actually only 5 are operative now. There are 2 laws that are laws, but their time has not yet come. And so a law is something that is there, but is a potential, and when the time is right, it becomes much more actualized. Well, for this one, the law of group endeavor, the time is ripe. The astrology is supporting it, it's becoming actualized. Okay, the next one, the principle of unanimity as of one mind, to be unanimous. This is so interesting too, because what is the word unanimity? What's the root word of it? It's anima. Anima, which is soul. Anima, soul. Unanimity, unity of soul. Unity of soul. It's different than, it's, you know, some of you know that in my book I have something called the near enemies to truth. And this one has a near enemy called uniformity. Unanimity can get distorted into uniformity. When you have uniformity, you have unity of form. When you have unanimity, you have unity of soul or consciousness. So we see that this has to be very closely watched as we move into the future, because it's very easy for this impulse to get distorted into uniformity. You know, a good example of this, it's so interesting. The Tibetan says this, when he speaks of Aquarius, he says the highest expression of Aquarius is present, and so has the lowest already manifested. And he said the lowest expression of Aquarian tendency is totalitarian regimes, where it's all about it's conformity, it's group, but it's conformity, where all your individuality and all your individual rights is sort of taken away from you in order to make everything structured and conformed. He says the highest expression of it is the hierarchy itself, the masters themselves. Their relationship to each other has no element of conformity. It's all unanimity. So this is just one of those areas that as we all do our work, whatever it is you're doing, be very conscious of that difference between unanimity and uniformity. Because it's really easy to slip into it. So much of many spiritual organizations start out that way and then end up uniformity, and you end up with kind of cult tendencies.